Hey there, and welcome back to one of my favorite areas of our garden, the Dahlia patch. Dahlias have long been a favorite flower of mine. In fact, I've been growing them since the very beginning. Back in 2019, in my very first garden, I planted just a handful of dahlia tubers, and I waited in anticipation for them to bloom. Fast forward to today, just a few seasons later, and this dahlia patch has close to 700 plants in bloom. And while it may seem like enough for most people, I question if we'll ever have enough space to grow all the dahlia varieties that I've fallen in love with over the years. In case you've fallen victim to the dahlia craze yourself, I wanted to take some time in today's video to share more on how we grow dahlias here at Two Sisters Flower Farm. Specifically, I want to touch on the differences between growing dahlias from seed versus tubers. I want to talk about the necessary growing conditions, what to do after your plants bloom, and so much more. So let's not waste any more time and let's get right into it. Much like the zinnias and the sunflowers that we grow here as part of our summer garden, dahlias are considered a tender annual, which means that we grow them during our frost-free growing season. For us, that means we plant our dahlias out around the middle of May, and we're rewarded with blooms starting around the middle of August. Now, I promise I'm going to do my best to not get ahead of myself, so let's break that process down just a bit further, starting with what we plant our dahlias from. So in case you didn't know, dahlias can be grown from seed, from tubers, or from cuttings. Now, no matter which method you choose for growing your dahlias, all will result in a fully mature dahlia plant which you can harvest flowers from in just one season. And all will leave you with a clump of tubers which you can dig up and replant the following season. That much doesn't change. But there are a few key differences worth noting, and that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start with perhaps the most popular method of growing dahlias, and that's from tubers. Now, tubers are aptly named because they are a tuberous root of a dahlia plant. They often look like potatoes, and they serve as a source of food and water for a dahlia plant to grow until a root system can be established. It's common for cut flower growers and even home gardeners to grow their dahlia plants from a single tuber that they plant into the ground. Some larger dahlia retailers and even big box garden stores, however, they will sell dahlia clumps, which is just multiple dahlia tubers attached to the same central stem. While there are subtle differences between clumps and single tubers, both will result in the growth of a beautiful dahlia, so long as your tuber or your clump has a strong body connected to an eye by way of a sturdy neck. The eye of a dahlia tuber is extremely important as it's a starting point for new dahlia sprouts. Without an eye, your dahlia tuber likely won't be viable and will fail to grow. Now, don't worry if you don't see any eyes at first. Dahlia tubers can sometimes take a bit of time to wake up. And especially if you're analyzing your tubers, early in the season while the weather is just starting to warm, it may take a bit before the eyes of your dahlia tubers are more pronounced. Typically, dahlia eyes start as small bumps on the crown of the tuber. With time, they turn green, red, or sometimes even purple, depending on the dahlia variety, and that's when you'll begin to see a sprout forming. So why do we grow dahlias from tubers? Well, the biggest advantage is that because tubers are genetic clones of their parent, we can know with certainty what dahlia varieties that we're planting in our garden. A tuber that comes from a cafe au lait plant will always result in a cafe au lait bloom. Likewise, a tuber that comes from American Dawn will always result in American Dawn flowers. The pattern is always the same. Tubers are exact clones of their mother plant. And so most growers will choose to grow from tubers since they can decide on which specific varieties they'd like to have on hand. For example, farmer florists may choose to grow more white, peach, and blush tones if they're designing for weddings. Flower farmers who sell market bouquets may prefer to grow more ball-shaped dahlia varieties as they tend to be easier to work with, in market bouquets. And home gardeners may prefer to decide they want to grow a specific variety for the novelty of it. I know that when I was just growing for hobby, I wanted to grow the bigger dinner plate varieties because I loved how showy of a bloom that they were. Similarly, if you grow dahlias from rooted cuttings, you will also have the added benefit of knowing exactly which varieties will bloom in your garden. Like tubers, cuttings are exact clones of the plant that they are cut from. Now, if you're unsure of what I'm talking about, dahlia cuttings are 3 to 4 inch long sprouts that are taken from the top of a tuber to propagate a new plant. Taking dahlia cuttings is a common practice flower farmers utilize often in the winter months when it's too cold to grow dahlias outside. I do have a separate video on how to take dahlia cuttings, and if you're interested in learning this easy process, I'll link that video in the description box below. Now, most growers will take cuttings as a fast, inexpensive way to multiply their stock of specific dahlia varieties that they'd like more of. Even though dahlia cuttings do require some advanced planning and preparation, the great thing about cuttings is that you can produce a healthy rooted cutting in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. While the number of cuttings a tuber will produce for you is varied, you can expect a single tuber to give you anywhere from 5 upwards of 20 cuttings in just a few short months. If you have ever purchased dahlia tubers, then you know that the cost of a single tuber can be quite high, ranging from $8, $20, and sometimes costing $25 and above. Now, there's good reason for the price tag, as dahlia tubers do require a bit of care to dig, store, and divide. But if you're wanting to scale up your production of dahlias in a short amount of time, you can imagine that that can come with a hefty price tag. Dahlia cuttings is an affordable way to multiply the number of dahlias that you're able to grow. Dahlia cuttings don't start as tubers. They resemble a more traditional plant start, but as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, dahlia cuttings, when dug up at the end of a season, will reward you with a small clump of tubers, just like any other dahlia tuber would. Now, if you want to grow dahlias inexpensively and you're not particular about the specific varieties that will bloom in your garden, growing dahlias from seed may be for you. In full transparency, I had no clue that you could even grow dahlias from seed when I was just starting to grow flowers. I mean, everyone talked about tubers and these must-grow varieties, and I never knew that an alternate way existed. But much like growing zinnias or any other tender annual, dahlias can be grown from seed as well. These dahlia plants, however, will not be clones of the parent plant. The resulting plant will be a hybrid, a mix of the plant they developed on, essentially their mother, and the plant whose pollen a bee or insect carried to the mother, essentially acting as a father. The different seeds on a seed head can be pollinated from different flower varieties, and so each seed from the head can look extremely different. It definitely makes for a fun surprise as the growing season progresses. This packet of dahlia seeds that I purchased from Floret has about 25 seeds inside, and each will develop into a mature plant, and my total cost was right around $6, a significant savings from purchasing individual dahlia tubers. To start dahlias from seed, I plant my seeds into a 72 cell tray 4 to 6 weeks ahead of my last frost date. I transplant the resulting seedlings after the threat of frost has passed, and I care for my dahlia seedlings just like I would any other dahlia plant in my dahlia patch. Regardless of what your dahlia plants start out as, whether it's a seed, a tuber, or a cutting, they all require the same basic care to really thrive. That starts with fertile soil that's preferably in full sun and is well draining. If you're growing in a warmer climate than me, who is growing in zone 5B, you may have better luck growing in partial shade. Dahlias are a warm season plant, but they don't take well to extreme heat. Even here in West Michigan, where I'm located, you'll notice that while dahlias grow just fine during the warm summer months, they really don't hit their stride till late August, early September, just as temperatures are starting to dip before autumn hits. Well-draining soil is also key, as dahlias grown in waterlogged soil can succumb to rot. Our soil here does have a bit of clay in it, so we water less than our neighbors on more sandy soil, And as you can see, our plants grow just fine. If you're concerned about the moisture content in your soil, raised beds, can be a great workaround, as you can create beds that will allow excess water to drain away. Now, I'm giving you lots of considerations to think about, as I want you to be successful with your dahlia plants. But perhaps the most important piece of advice that I can give you is to not overthink it and to just try your hand at growing dahlias. Once you do it once, you'll likely be surprised at how simple the process really is. We grow our dahlias in the ground in long, straight rows, as that makes it easy for us to care for all of our dahlias. We space our plants roughly 12 inches apart, and I prefer to plant just 2 rows of dahlias per 3-foot wide bed. To help you visualize what I'm talking about, this illustration will show you what our bed looks like. We do plant into plastic mulch, as it helps to lessen our weed pressure. You could plant similarly into landscape fabric if that's what you prefer. But again, I just want to caution any warm climate growers. Heavy mulch and even weed barriers can bring additional warmth to your soil. In especially warm climates, this may create added stress for your plants. It's just something to be mindful of as you decide on the best growing practices for you. For each dahlia tuber, we dig a hole 4 to 6 inches deep, and we lay each dahlia tuber horizontally with its growing eye facing up. Our dahlia cuttings and dahlia seedlings are planted the same as any other annual transplant, with the foliage above the soil. Once our dahlias are planted, it takes a bit of patience before new growth emerges from our tubers. Each variety is varied in the time it takes to wake up, and it may take anywhere between 2 and 6 weeks before you see a sprout emerge above the ground. While we do water our dahlia seedlings and cuttings as soon as they're planted, we have drip tape that is laid beneath our plastic mulch and runs the length of our beds, we're careful not to water our tubers until we see growth above the soil. Tubers naturally hold a lot of moisture. If you've ever cut into a tuber and you've seen its flesh, you can sort of get a feel for just how much water is inside. Too much water too soon before the tuber has had a chance to establish roots can cause the tuber to rot, and the plant will not grow. Once our dahlias are fully above the ground, we do irrigate on a more consistent schedule. For most growers, watering is the trickiest part of dahlia care, as it's really dependent on a number of factors that are unique to you. Your soil, your climate, your weather, whether or not you use mulch. We give our dahlia plants a deep water maybe once a week as they are establishing. We may water more frequently as the temperatures rise in the heat of summer, or as our plants become larger, more mature, and require more water to stay hydrated. My best advice to know how much water your dahlias require is to be observant of how they grow. If you observe that your plants are wilting in the heat of day and not recovering at night when the temperatures have cooled down, this could be a sign that your plants aren't getting enough water. Conversely, if your plant leaves are starting to become limp and blistered, you may be overwatering your dahlia plant. Take the time to learn what a healthy dahlia plant looks like in your garden, and you'll be much more confident being able to supply that plant with exactly what it needs. So once your dahlia plants are 8 to 12 inches tall, they can benefit from a common practice called pinching. Now, pinching is simply the act of removing the top 3 to 4 inches of your dahlia's central stem as it grows. Once your dahlia plants have 3 to 4 sets of leaves, that's really an ideal time to pinch your plants. Now, the benefit to this is that it encourages your plant to send up multiple stems from the base of the plant, just below your cut, and it often results in more blooms over the season. Even better, the resulting blooms often have skinnier, more desirable stems. You see, cutting out that central stem helps keep your plant from developing large, hollow stems that are so thick that they're nearly impossible to use in cut flower bouquets. While pinching can be an effectively great strategy for growing beautiful stems of dahlias, I'd be lying if I told you that I pinch every single one of my dahlia plants each year. I do my best to get to each row of dahlias, but sometimes, the work just gets the better of me and I simply don't get to each plant in time. If this is you, you can still enjoy an abundance of blooms throughout your season. You'll just want to be sure that you're ruthless, in cutting deep into your plants as you begin to harvest those first blooms. We'll talk more about this when I share about harvesting your flowers later in this video. Dahlias, once fully mature, they can be quite large plants, and while there are plenty of beautiful landscape varieties that you can grow, dahlia varieties that are grown for cut flower use will typically reach heights of 3 to 6 feet. And so one thing that we do to ensure that our plants stay upright even when covered in heavy blooms is we supply our plants with additional support. Now, I have a more in-depth video on our channel where I shared how we corral and net the various flower varieties that we grow. So if you want more details, go check that video out. But for the sake of time, I will simply say that we do stake our dahlia plants. We pound T-posts into our soil about every 8 to 10 feet, and then I'll corral our plants using baler twine. So planting, watering, pinching, and staking, that's really the basics of dahlia care. Now all that's left is to enjoy your hard work and harvest your blooms as they begin to appear. Now, it's interesting to me, but dahlias don't make great cut flowers. They often have a short vase life lasting just 4 to 5 days, and since they don't typically open more after being harvested, dahlias have to be cut when the blooms are fully open, which leaves petals susceptible to damage, especially during transportation. Still, dahlias are so favored by growers and consumers alike that they can be worth a little extra fuss. So as with all flowers, best practices for harvesting your blooms don't change. You're going to want to harvest during the coolest parts of the day, either early morning or late evening. You're going to want to harvest using a clean pair of sharp snips. You can find my favorite snips, linked in the description box below. And you're always going to want to harvest into fresh, clean water. Now, knowing exactly when a dahlia bloom is ready for harvest will take some observation on your part. As I just mentioned, dahlias typically don't open after harvesting, so be sure to catch blooms as they're more fully open. The most mature blooms often have petals that reflex backwards, and I'll often avoid harvesting these flowers as they won't hold their petals for long. If the back petals in your dahlias are either faded, shriveled, or even curled, that's usually a good indication of a bloom that's past its ideal harvest window. Also, if your bloom has visible pollen in the center of the bloom, that's another sign of a flower that will give you a shorter vase life. In this case, the bloom has been pollinated, it's sort of switched into seed production mode, and it's not ideal when we're talking about flowers for cut flower use. Knowing where to cut in your plants as you harvest your dahlias can take some practice. It's best if you can cut just above a leaf node. Now, just how long you cut your stems will be a matter of personal preference. I encourage you to cut deep into your plants, even if you lose flower buds in the process. I always aim to cut stems of at least 12 to 16 inches, as this gives me plenty of flexibility when I'm using my blooms in mixed bouquets. While it can feel intimidating removing so much from your dahlia plants, it's often ill-advised to cut short stems from your dahlias. When you cut short stems, say 6 to 8 inches, what happens is that over time, the subsequent flowers bloom on shorter and weaker stems. And again, those types of blooms are hard to use in arrangements. To maintain consistent blooms from your plants, all season long, be sure to regularly cut from your plants. If you don't have a need for blooms, be sure to still deadhead spent flowers from your plants. This signals your plants to continue putting energy into flower production, rather than slowing down to set seeds. I regularly will walk my dahlia rows at least twice a week, and I'm sure to remove any flowers that appear past their prime. It can sometimes feel like a tedious process, but it's truly worth it in my opinion to get the most from your dahlia plants. Dahlias are great as they really crank out the blooms. With regular harvests and consistent care, you can expect to enjoy blooms all the way up until your season's first frost. As I've said at the start of this video, dahlias are tender annuals and they will not survive your first hard kill frost come fall. But don't worry, you can still enjoy your dahlias for seasons to come. Yes, dahlias, no matter how they start, whether they're from seed, from cuttings, or from tubers, they produce tuber clumps throughout the growing season. In cold climates like here in West Michigan where we grow, these tuber clumps, they won't survive the harsh winter temperatures in the ground. But if they're lifted from the ground in the fall and stored in a somewhat warmer environment for the duration of winter, you can plant your tubers out again come spring. And repeat this process for another growing season. It's sort of the gift that keeps on giving. Now, for the sake of keeping this video short, I won't go into detail on how we store and dig our dahlia tubers. I will share though that we do have a video showing you more of this process, and I'll link it in the description box below. Lastly, if you're as big of a dahlia fan as I am, then you may find this video interesting, where we share our absolute favorite dahlia varieties to grow as cut flowers. So be sure to check out that video next. Now before you go, if you could give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye now.